1838. A girl is born on a volcanic island in the Pacific. By 1893, she wears a crown and commands a kingdom. Then she makes an impossible choice: surrender her throne to save her people from bloodshed. This is Liliʻuokalani, Hawaii's last queen. Honolulu, 1838. Lydia Kamakaʻeha was born into Hawaiian royalty during a time when the islands balanced between ancient traditions and the modern world rushing toward them. Her name meant the sore eye, chosen according to Hawaiian custom based on events surrounding her birth. Names carried power in Hawaiian culture, shaping destiny in ways outsiders rarely understood. Hawaiian tradition practiced something called hanai adoption, where children were raised by families other than their birth parents to strengthen political and social bonds. Lydia was given to Chief Konia and his wife to raise. This wasn't abandonment. It was an honor, a way of weaving families together into stronger networks. She grew up surrounded by love, music, and the responsibilities that came with royal blood. The Hawaii of her childhood was changing rapidly. American missionaries had arrived years earlier, bringing Christianity, written language, and ideas that sometimes clashed with ancient Hawaiian ways. But they also brought education. Lydia attended the chief's children's school, where she learned alongside other children of royal families. She studied English, mathematics, geography, and proper Victorian manners. She became fluent in both Hawaiian and English, comfortable in both worlds. But her real education came from Hawaiian culture itself. She learned the ancient chants, the oli that preserved history and honored gods. She learned about the connection between land and people, the concept of aloha aina, love for the land. She learned that leadership meant service, that chiefs existed to care for their people, not to exploit them. These values would shape every decision she made later. Music became her passion early. She had natural talent that amazed her teachers. She could hear a melody once and reproduce it perfectly. She could compose original music that captured emotions others struggled to express in words. Hawaiian music wasn't just entertainment. It was history, poetry, prayer, and political commentary woven together in sound. Through music, she was learning to be Hawaiian in the deepest sense. She also learned the realities of power. Hawaii was an independent kingdom, but barely. American business interests were growing stronger every year. Sugar plantations were taking over vast stretches of land. Foreign advisors increasingly influenced the king's decisions. Native Hawaiians were losing ground in their own homeland, demographically, economically, politically. The question wasn't whether Hawaii would survive as an independent nation, but how long it could hold out. Lydia watched older royals navigate these treacherous waters. Some adapted to Western ways completely, hoping that modernization would preserve independence. Others clung to tradition, trying to maintain Hawaiian culture against the tide. Most tried to find some middle path, honoring the past while securing the future. There were no easy answers. Every choice carried risks. She married John Owen Dominus, an American-born government official, in Tukstots Astonisimti Sejdesmit Utrais. The marriage was politically strategic, but personally complicated. Dominus came from a prominent local family and could help bridge the gap between Hawaiian royalty and the American business community. But his mother dominated his life in ways that created constant tension. Lydia found herself navigating not just international politics, but family dynamics that would strain anyone. Through it all, she composed music. When words failed, when politics became too frustrating, when personal relationships disappointed, she had music. Her compositions began circulating beyond the palace, becoming popular among ordinary Hawaiians. They felt her music spoke to their own experiences of living in changing times, honoring old ways while facing new realities. In 1874, her brother David Kalakaua was elected king. This made Lydia heir apparent to the Hawaiian throne. The position came with heavy responsibilities and very little actual power. She served as regent when her brother traveled abroad, gaining experience in governance while understanding its limits. Hawaii's independence was increasingly theoretical. American business interests, backed by American military power, were the real rulers. The crown was becoming decorative. But Lydia refused to accept that fate. She studied other small nations that had maintained independence despite larger powers surrounding them. She cultivated relationships with foreign diplomats. She traveled to England, attending Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, learning how other monarchies navigated the modern world. She was preparing herself not just to inherit a throne, but to fight for her kingdom's survival. The fight would prove harder than she imagined. King Kalakaua's reign was troubled from the start. American business interests, particularly sugar plantation owners, wanted more control. They chafed under Hawaiian law, which still gave Native Hawaiians some protections and limited foreign land ownership. The businessmen wanted Hawaii to function like an American territory, while still maintaining the appearance of an independent kingdom. They wanted all the benefits of sovereignty, with none of the responsibilities. In 1887, they made their move. A group calling themselves the Hawaiian League, backed by armed militia, forced King Kalakaua to sign a new constitution at gunpoint. This document, which Hawaiians bitterly called the Bayonet Constitution, stripped the monarchy of most of its power. It also changed voting requirements in ways that disenfranchised most Native Hawaiians and Asian residents, while giving voting rights to American and European residents who didn't even need to be citizens. Lydia watched this happen with growing fury. Her brother had been humiliated. The Hawaiian people had been robbed of their political voice. The kingdom's independence was now a complete fiction. But what could they do? The businessmen had weapons. They had the tacit support of the American military. They controlled the economy. Fighting back seemed impossible. Accepting the situation felt like betrayal. King Kalakaua tried to maintain dignity in an impossible situation. He continued performing his ceremonial duties while the Americans ran everything that mattered. The stress destroyed him. He traveled to California, hoping the change would help his deteriorating health. In January 1891, he died in San Francisco, far from home. Hawaii mourned not just a king, but the independence he represented. The kingdom was dying with him. Lydia became queen at age 52. She took the name Liliʻuokalani, meaning the smarting of the high-born one. Again, Hawaiian naming customs carried meaning. She was declaring that she felt the pain of her people, that she understood the insult of their situation. She was also declaring that she would not simply accept things as they were. Highborn meant having responsibilities, not just privileges. Her coronation was magnificent, a deliberate display of Hawaiian culture and royal authority. Musicians performed ancient chants. She wore traditional royal regalia alongside Western formal dress. The message was clear. This was a Hawaiian kingdom, not an American colony. She would govern according to Hawaiian values, not foreign business interests. The American businessmen watched nervously. They had grown comfortable with a weak king. A strong queen terrified them. She immediately began working on a new constitution that would restore power to the monarchy and voting rights to Native Hawaiians. This was exactly what the business community feared. They had gotten used to running Hawaii for their own benefit. A powerful Hawaiian monarch, backed by Hawaiian voters, would threaten everything they had built. They began planning her removal before she could act. The situation was increasingly desperate. Native Hawaiians were becoming a minority in their own homeland. Disease introduced by foreigners had devastated the population. Asian workers imported for plantations outnumbered natives. Americans and Europeans controlled most wealth and land. If Hawaii became an American territory, which seemed increasingly likely, Hawaiians would become second-class citizens in their own country. Everything would be lost. Liliʻuokalani understood the stakes perfectly. She also understood that she had very few good options. She couldn't fight the Americans militarily. They had weapons, training, and the support of U.S. military forces stationed in Hawaii. She couldn't compete economically. American businesses controlled the sugar industry that dominated the economy. Her only weapon was legitimacy. She was the rightful queen of an independent nation recognized by international law. That had to count for something. She reached out to other nations, hoping international pressure would constrain American actions. She cultivated relationships with British diplomats. She emphasized Hawaii's treaties with multiple nations, its membership in the international community. She was trying to build a coalition that would make American annexation politically impossible. It was a reasonable strategy. It might even have worked, given time. But she didn't have time. The Americans weren't interested in legal niceties or international opinion. They wanted Hawaii, and they were prepared to take it by force. They had already written the script. They would provoke a crisis, claim they needed to restore order, overthrow the Queen, and establish a provisional government that would immediately request American annexation. It was colonialism dressed up as crisis management. Liliʻuokalani saw it coming. She tried to outmaneuver them, proposing her constitutional reforms before they could act. But she moved too slowly. The Americans were already mobilizing. In January 1893, just 2 years after she became queen, they struck. Armed militia surrounded Iolani Palace. U.S. Marines from the USS Boston landed, ostensibly to protect American lives and property. The message was clear. Surrender or face invasion. Iolani Palace was surrounded. Armed men occupied strategic positions around the grounds. The American minister had formally recognized the provisional government before it even controlled anything beyond a single building. The USS Boston sat in the harbor, its guns aimed at the palace. Liliʻuokalani had perhaps 100 palace guards. They were loyal, brave, and completely outmatched. She could fight. Many of her supporters wanted her to. They were ready to defend their queen and their kingdom with their lives. She could barricade the palace, turn it into a fortress, make the Americans pay in blood for every room. It would be futile, but it would be defiant. Future generations would remember that Hawaii fought for its freedom rather than surrendering meekly. But fighting meant death. Not just her own death, which she might have accepted. It meant the deaths of her guards, young Hawaiian men with families. It meant civilian casualties when the fighting spread beyond the palace. It meant giving the Americans perfect justification for their actions. They would say they had no choice but to intervene to restore order. The world would believe them. Hawaii would still lose its independence, but hundreds of Hawaiians would die first. She made the hardest decision of her life. She would surrender, but not to the Americans. She surrendered to the superior force of the United States, temporarily, until the U.S. government could investigate and restore her rightful authority. She was betting that President Cleveland, who had opposed annexation, would see this coup for what it was and demand justice. She was choosing to fight with law and diplomacy rather than guns. Her statement of surrender was careful and strategic. She didn't abdicate. She didn't acknowledge the legitimacy of the provisional government. She yielded to superior American military force to avoid bloodshed, explicitly noting that she expected the United States to undo this wrong. She was creating a legal record, preserving Hawaii's claim to independence, protecting her people, while maintaining that this coup was illegal under international law. Many Hawaiians felt betrayed. Their queen had surrendered without firing a shot. Some called her weak. They didn't understand the impossible position she was in. They didn't see that fighting would have accomplished nothing except getting people killed. They wanted dramatic resistance, not calculating strategy. She gave them strategy, knowing some would never forgive her for it. The provisional government moved quickly to cement their power. They declared the monarchy abolished. They began dismantling Hawaiian law and replacing it with American-style governance. They prepared documents requesting American annexation. Everything was happening fast, before anyone could organize effective opposition or before international pressure could develop. They were trying to make their coup irreversible. But President Cleveland surprised them. He opposed annexation on principle and was disturbed by reports of American involvement in the coup. He sent an investigator, James Blount, to Hawaii to determine what actually happened. Blount's investigation confirmed everything Liliʻuokalani had claimed. The coup was illegal. American Minister John Stevens had conspired with the businessmen. U.S. troops had been used to overthrow a friendly government. It was a national embarrassment. Cleveland demanded that the provisional government restore the Queen. He said the coup was an act of war against a peaceful nation with which America had treaty obligations. He wanted the status quo before the coup restored. For a brief moment, it seemed like Liliʻuokalani's strategy had worked. Justice would prevail. Hawaii would regain its independence. The impossible gamble had paid off. But the provisional government refused. They controlled the islands physically. They had weapons and American settlers backing them. They simply said no to the president's demand. What could Cleveland do? Invade Hawaii to restore the Queen? That would be politically impossible domestically. Use economic pressure? The business community supported the coup. He was stuck, unable to undo the wrong without making things worse. Liliʻuokalani waited in Washington Place, her private home. She was technically a private citizen now, though most Hawaiians still considered her their queen. She had no power, no authority, no means to force restoration. She could only wait and hope that justice would eventually prevail. It was an agonizing position for someone accustomed to action, but she was patient. She had learned patience watching her kingdom slowly lose independence over decades. Meanwhile, the provisional government was transforming into the Republic of Hawaii, with Sanford Dole as president. This was purely cosmetic. The same people held power. They just gave their regime a more respectable name. They continued pushing for American annexation while suppressing Hawaiian political activity. They were building facts on the ground, making restoration increasingly difficult with every passing month. Liliʻuokalani refused to acknowledge any of it. She was still the queen. Hawaii was still an independent kingdom. The provisional government, then the Republic, was an illegal regime imposed by force. She would never legitimize it by accepting its authority. This wasn't just stubbornness. It was strategic. As long as she maintained her claim, as long as Hawaiians recognized her authority, the American coup remained incomplete. They had conquered the islands, but not won legitimacy. In January 1895, a group of royalist supporters attempted an armed uprising to restore the Queen. They had been planning quietly for months, gathering weapons and coordinating with sympathizers. They believed the time had come to take back their kingdom by force, since diplomacy had failed. The rebellion was brave, desperate, and doomed from the start. The Republic's forces crushed the uprising quickly. They had better weapons, better training, and advance warning from informants. The fighting was brief but brutal. Several royalists died. Many more were captured. The Republic's government saw this as their perfect opportunity to break Hawaiian resistance once and for all. They would make examples that would terrify anyone thinking about future opposition. They arrested Liliʻuokalani. They claimed she had been involved in planning the rebellion, that weapons had been found buried in her garden. She denied any knowledge of the plot. That was probably true. The rebels had acted independently, knowing she would disapprove of violence. But truth didn't matter. The Republic needed her removed from the political equation permanently. Charging her with treason gave them justification. She was imprisoned in Iolani Palace, her own former home. The irony was deliberate and cruel. They put her in an upstairs bedroom that had once been her private quarters. Now it was a cell, a single small room with a bed, a table, and guards watching constantly. She couldn't leave. She couldn't receive visitors without permission. She could look out the windows at Honolulu, at her kingdom, at everything she had lost. The trial was a formality. The verdict was predetermined. She was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years hard labor, which was later commuted to house arrest. She was also fined $5,000. Her supporters were sentenced to varying terms, some facing execution. The Republic was sending a clear message: resistance would be crushed without mercy. The Hawaiian kingdom was dead. Accept it or suffer the consequences. In her cell, Liliʻuokalani did something remarkable. She composed music. In conditions designed to break her spirit, she created beauty. She wrote what would become her most famous song, Aloha Oi, Farewell to Thee. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, the lyrics bittersweet. It spoke of parting, of love that endures despite separation, of sorrow mixed with acceptance. The song became instantly popular among Hawaiians. They understood it wasn't just a love song, though it worked on that level. It was about Hawaii itself, about their forced separation from their queen and their independence. It was about loss that couldn't be reversed, but also about love that couldn't be destroyed. She had found a way to speak to her people that her captors couldn't silence. Music carried messages that words couldn't safely express. She filled her time with other compositions too. She worked on a chant collection, preserving ancient Hawaiian poetry and genealogies. She wrote letters when permitted, maintaining connections with supporters. She read, she prayed, she endured. The months dragged past slowly. Winter became spring, became summer. Still, she remained imprisoned, uncertain if she would ever be free. The Republic eventually realized they had created a martyr. An imprisoned queen was more dangerous than a freed one. She was a constant reminder of the theft of Hawaiian independence. International criticism was growing. Even some Americans were uncomfortable with a woman imprisoned for the crime of defending her kingdom. The Republic needed to release her without appearing weak. They offered a deal. She would formally abdicate, renouncing all claims to the throne. In exchange, she would be freed, and her imprisoned supporters would receive reduced sentences. It was a terrible choice. Abdication would legitimize everything the Republic had done, but refusing meant her supporters would suffer longer imprisonments, possibly executions. Once again, she was choosing between principle and protecting her people. She signed the abdication document. It was the hardest thing she ever wrote. The words felt like betrayal, like surrender, like the final death of everything she had fought for. But she signed because dying in prison, accomplishing nothing, seemed worse than living to continue the fight in different ways. She could abdicate the throne without abandoning her people. She could accept legal defeat without accepting moral defeat. Her release brought relief, but no joy. She was free to move around Honolulu, but not to leave the islands without permission. She was watched constantly. Her mail was monitored. Her visitors were noted. She lived in Washington Place, technically at liberty, but practically under permanent surveillance. The Republic wanted her visible, but powerless, a reminder that resistance was futile. Hawaiians still treated her as their queen. They didn't care about abdication documents signed under duress. She was Liliʻuokalani, their rightful monarch, and no foreign government could change that. When she walked through Honolulu, people bowed. They sought her blessing. They asked her advice. She had no legal authority, but she had something more important: legitimacy rooted in Hawaiian hearts. She began planning her next move. Diplomacy had failed. Armed resistance had failed. Imprisonment had failed to break her. Now she would try something different. She would go to America itself, to the centers of power, and make her case directly to the American people and their government. She would fight with truth, with moral authority, with the power of her story. It was a long shot, but what else did she have? In 1896, Liliʻuokalani traveled to Washington, D.C. This wasn't a state visit. She had no official status. She was simply a private citizen from Hawaii, though everyone knew she was really a deposed queen seeking justice. The Republic's government granted her travel permission reluctantly. They hoped the trip would accomplish nothing and prove to Hawaiians that resistance was pointless. She had different plans. She intended to lobby Congress directly against annexation. She would meet with sympathetic politicians, journalists, and activists. She would tell her story to anyone who would listen. She would remind Americans that Hawaii was an independent nation with treaty relationships, not an unclaimed territory waiting to be absorbed. She would make annexation politically and morally complicated. Washington society didn't quite know what to make of her. She was exotic, a real queen from the Pacific, which gave her celebrity status. But she was also a reminder of American imperial ambitions, which made some people uncomfortable. She navigated this carefully, being dignified without being confrontational, maintaining her royal bearing while not threatening anyone. She was walking a diplomatic tightrope. She met with President Cleveland, who sympathized with her situation but was powerless to help. His term was ending, and his party had lost Congress. The next president, McKinley, supported annexation. The political winds were shifting against her, but she didn't give up. She met with individual senators and representatives, building relationships, explaining why annexation would be wrong, providing them with legal and moral arguments they could use. She wrote extensively. Articles appeared in newspapers under her name, describing the coup from her perspective. She worked on a book, Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, which would provide a comprehensive account of events. She was creating a historical record that would outlast the immediate political situation. Even if she couldn't stop annexation, she could ensure that future generations knew the truth. The book was remarkable. She wrote in clear, powerful English, making complex political situations accessible to ordinary readers. She explained Hawaiian culture and history to people who knew nothing about the islands. She described the coup from inside the palace, giving readers an intimate view of how Hawaiian independence was stolen. She didn't demonize individual Americans, but clearly condemned American imperial policy. She also made her case from American principles. She pointed out that the Declaration of Independence condemned this kind of colonialism, that the Constitution supposedly protected the rights of all people, that America claimed to oppose imperial conquest. How could Americans reconcile their stated values with what was happening in Hawaii? She was using America's own ideals as weapons against American policy. The strategy was clever and partially successful. Public opinion was divided. Many Americans were genuinely troubled by the circumstances of the coup. They believed in self-determination and felt uncomfortable with naked imperial conquest. But other Americans wanted Hawaii for strategic and economic reasons. The islands provided a perfect Pacific naval base and profitable sugar plantations. Morality was secondary to national interest. Meanwhile, in Hawaii, the Republic was struggling with legitimacy problems. Most Native Hawaiians refused to accept the new government. They couldn't mount military resistance, but they engaged in passive resistance, refusing to cooperate, maintaining loyalty to their deposed queen. The Republic needed annexation to happen quickly, before organized opposition could develop or international pressure could mount. The Spanish-American War in 1898 changed everything. America suddenly needed Hawaiian harbors as naval bases for military operations in the Pacific. Strategic necessity trumped concerns about the legality of the coup or the wishes of Hawaiian people. Congress passed a joint resolution annexing Hawaii, bypassing the treaty process that would have required more international approval. It was done. Hawaii was now American territory. Liliʻuokalani was in Washington when it happened. She had spent 2 years fighting annexation through legal channels, public advocacy, and diplomatic pressure. She had failed. Everything she feared had come to pass. Her kingdom was gone. Her people were now subjects of a foreign power. The cultural destruction she had tried to prevent would accelerate. She had lost everything. But she hadn't lost her voice. She immediately filed a formal protest with the U.S. government. She documented the illegal nature of both the coup and the annexation. She demanded compensation for herself and for Hawaiian people whose lands and rights had been stolen. She wasn't expecting justice, but she was creating a record. Someday, perhaps long after she was gone, that record might matter. She also refused to take American citizenship. She was offered it automatically as a Hawaiian resident when annexation occurred. She declined. She was Hawaiian, not American. She was still the queen, regardless of what American law said. This wasn't just symbolic stubbornness. It was a statement of Hawaiian identity and continuity. As long as she refused to be American, as long as she maintained her claim, Hawaiian independence wasn't completely dead. She returned to Honolulu, to Washington Place, to a different Hawaii than the one she had left. American flags flew everywhere. English was increasingly dominant. American businesses were expanding rapidly. The Hawaiian language was being suppressed in schools. Everything she had feared was happening. But Hawaiian culture wasn't dead yet. It survived in homes, in hearts, in the music she continued to compose, and the traditions she continued to honor. She began focusing on what she could still protect: Hawaiian music, language, genealogies, traditions. She worked with cultural practitioners to preserve knowledge that might otherwise be lost. She became a teacher of Hawaiian identity, showing younger generations what it meant to be Hawaiian in a world that wanted them to become American. She was fighting a different kind of war now, a cultural survival war. After annexation, Liliʻuokalani could have retreated into bitter isolation. Many people would have understood if she spent her remaining years nursing grievances. She had lost her kingdom, her crown, her political power. She was living under the flag of the nation that had stolen everything from her. She would have been justified in being angry and withdrawn. Instead, she turned outward, focusing on service. She established the Liliʻuokalani Trust in 1909, dedicating her personal fortune and property to helping orphaned and destitute Hawaiian children. This wasn't a small charity. It was a comprehensive organization providing housing, education, health care, and support for children who had no one else. She was creating a legacy that would outlast her, ensuring that Hawaiian children would have opportunities even as their broader culture was under assault. The trust reflected her understanding of how colonialism worked. It wasn't just about taking land and political power. It was about breaking cultures, destroying families, disconnecting children from their heritage. By providing for orphaned Hawaiian children, she was helping ensure that Hawaiian identity could survive into the next generation. She was protecting the future of her people in the most literal way possible. She remained active in her 70s, visiting the Trust's facilities, meeting with children, overseeing programs. She wasn't a distant benefactor signing checks. She was personally involved, using her status and presence to make children feel valued and connected to their heritage. For many orphaned Hawaiian children, meeting their former queen was a transformative experience that connected them to their history. She also continued composing music. By the end of her life, she had written over 160 songs. Some were traditional Hawaiian chants, preserving ancient knowledge. Others were modern compositions, blending Hawaiian and Western musical styles. Some were explicitly political, encoded messages about resistance and survival. Others were simply beautiful melodies, celebrating nature and love and the Hawaiian spirit. Her music became part of the cultural resistance to Americanization. When Hawaiian language was banned in schools, people could still sing Hawaiian songs. When Hawaiian culture was suppressed in public life, it survived in music. Her compositions kept the language alive, kept Hawaiian ways of thinking and feeling accessible to generations who were being taught to forget. Music was her most effective political weapon. She maintained connections with international royalty. She corresponded with Queen Victoria's successors, with European monarchs, with other deposed rulers. These relationships served multiple purposes. They kept Hawaii visible on the international stage. They maintained Hawaii's status as a nation, even if it was occupied. They reminded the world that what had happened in Hawaii was wrong. She was thinking beyond her own lifetime, planting seeds for future justice. She also refused to let Americans forget what they had done. When American officials visited Hawaii, she reminded them of the illegal coup. When journalists interviewed her, she told the story of annexation from the Hawaiian perspective. She was polite but relentless, never letting the narrative become comfortable, never allowing Americans to pretend that Hawaii had voluntarily joined the Union. She was inconvenient moral conscience. She practiced what Hawaiians call the spirit of aloha, which is more complex than simple friendliness. Aloha means love, but also respect, compassion, and recognition of shared humanity, even with enemies. She could be gracious to individual Americans while condemning American imperial policy. She could forgive personal wrongs while never forgetting political injustice. This wasn't contradiction. It was sophisticated moral thinking. Washington Place became a gathering point for Hawaiians seeking connection to their heritage. She held regular salons where Hawaiian language, music, and traditions were practiced and celebrated. Young people came to learn from her. Elders came to honor her. Everyone came to feel, at least briefly, that Hawaiian culture was still alive and valued. Her home was an embassy for a nation that officially no longer existed. She advocated for Hawaiian rights within the American system, since independence was impossible for now. She pushed for Hawaiian language education. She fought against laws that discriminated against Native Hawaiians. She worked to protect Hawaiian cultural sites and practices. She had accepted that Hawaii was politically American, but she refused to accept that it had to become culturally American. Her approach influenced how many Hawaiians navigated the colonial situation. They learned from her that you could be tactically flexible without surrendering your identity, that you could work within the system while maintaining your own values, that survival sometimes required strategic retreat, but retreat didn't mean surrender. She was teaching resistance that could last generations. She also thought about historical justice. She knew she wouldn't live to see Hawaiian independence restored, but she believed that eventually, perhaps in the distant future, the world would recognize the injustice of what had happened. She was creating documentation, preserving knowledge, maintaining claims that future generations could use. She was thinking in terms of centuries, not years. That's what real leadership looks like. Her reputation evolved as she aged. Americans who had seen her as an obstacle to progress began viewing her as a dignified elder worthy of respect. Even people who supported annexation could admire her grace in defeat and her dedication to serving Hawaiian children. She was becoming a symbol that transcended political divisions, representing something valuable that had been lost when Hawaii became American territory. Music was Liliʻuokalani's deepest passion and most enduring legacy. Every song she composed carried layers of meaning. On the surface, they were beautiful melodies about love, nature, and Hawaiian life. Underneath, they encoded political messages, preserved cultural knowledge, and maintained connections to pre-colonial Hawaiian ways of understanding the world. Her music was resistance disguised as art. Aloha Oi became known worldwide, performed by musicians from every country. Most listeners heard a lovely farewell song. Hawaiians heard their queen saying goodbye to her stolen kingdom. Both interpretations were valid. That multiplicity of meaning was intentional. She was communicating simultaneously to different audiences, hiding political messages in plain sight, where American authorities couldn't suppress them without looking foolish. Her compositions preserved Hawaiian language at a time when it was being systematically erased. American authorities banned Hawaiian in schools, claiming English was necessary for progress and assimilation. But they couldn't ban music. People could still sing in Hawaiian, still maintain the language's sounds and structures through song. Her music became a refuge for language survival. She also preserved traditional Hawaiian poetic forms. Ancient Hawaiian poetry used complex patterns of rhythm, wordplay, and allusion that carried specific cultural knowledge. These forms were disappearing as elders died and younger generations learned only English. She incorporated traditional poetic techniques into modern compositions, creating bridges between old and new, ensuring that ancient knowledge stayed accessible. Her songs dealt with Hawaiian cosmology and spirituality. Christianity had become dominant in Hawaii, but old beliefs persisted alongside it. She composed chants honoring traditional gods and sacred places, preserving religious knowledge that was being forgotten. She did this carefully, never openly challenging Christianity, but maintaining space for Hawaiian spiritual traditions to survive. Religious colonization was gentler than political colonization, but just as destructive if left unchallenged. She taught music to anyone interested. Students came to Washington Place for lessons in composition, performance, and the cultural context of Hawaiian music. She was training the next generation of culture bearers. Many of Hawaii's most important 20th century musicians learned directly from her or from her students. Her influence rippled outward through decades of teaching and mentoring. She understood that music could accomplish things that politics couldn't. Political arguments created opposition. Music created emotional connections. People who would never listen to a speech about Hawaiian independence would listen to a beautiful song. Some of them would start asking questions. Why was this music so different from American music? What did the lyrics really mean? What happened to the culture that created these sounds? Music opened doors that politics had closed. Her compositions also documented history. Each song captured a moment, a feeling, a situation that might otherwise be forgotten. Historians studying her music can reconstruct not just events, but emotional atmosphere, how it felt to live through Hawaii's loss of independence. This emotional history is as important as factual history. It helps future generations understand why events mattered, why people cared, why resistance continued even when it seemed hopeless. She corresponded with musicians worldwide. She sent compositions to performers in America and Europe. She wanted Hawaiian music to be respected internationally, not treated as primitive or exotic curiosity. She wanted the world to hear Hawaiian sophistication, complexity, and emotional depth. She was conducting a cultural diplomacy campaign through music, building international appreciation that might someday translate into political support. Her music also provided economic support for Hawaiian musicians. Royalties from her compositions went into the Liliʻuokalani Trust and directly to performers. She was creating a sustainable economic model where Hawaiian culture could support Hawaiian people. This was crucial as traditional Hawaiian economy was being destroyed by American capitalism. Music became one of the few ways Hawaiians could earn money while maintaining cultural integrity. She experimented with different musical styles, blending Hawaiian traditions with Western classical music, with American popular music, with whatever she encountered. This wasn't abandoning tradition. It was keeping tradition alive by showing it could evolve. Cultures that refuse to change die. Cultures that change too quickly lose their identity. She was finding that middle path, honoring tradition while engaging modernity. Near the end of her life, she focused on preserving the most sacred and ancient chants. These were genealogies, creation stories, and religious invocations that predated Western contact. They were oral traditions, never written down, maintained through careful memorization across generations. She feared they would be lost entirely as elders died. She worked with cultural practitioners to record and preserve them, creating written archives while respecting their sacred nature. Her final compositions were increasingly about legacy and continuity. She knew she was dying. She wanted to leave something that would help Hawaiians survive whatever came next. Her last songs were full of hope, despite everything she had experienced. She was telling future generations that Hawaiian culture was strong enough to survive, that they should never give up their identity, that someday justice might prevail. She was singing to people who weren't born yet. In her final years, Liliʻuokalani became a living repository of Hawaiian culture. Young Hawaiians visited to learn their language and traditions. Her most important work was preserving Hawaiian identity. Despite every reason for bitterness, she demonstrated aloha spirit. She was gracious to American officials, even when they represented the government that had stolen her kingdom. Aloha was strength through compassion. She maintained that the coup was illegal. She kept meticulous records documenting American violations of sovereignty. She updated her will to include provisions for future compensation claims. She mentored younger Hawaiian leaders, teaching strategy and cultural resistance. You don't have to win every battle to win the war. Sometimes the most effective resistance is simply surviving. She reflected on her surrender decision. Some criticized her for not fighting. She stood by her choice. Bloodshed would have accomplished nothing except giving Americans justification while killing Hawaiians. Strategic surrender preserved lives. She wrote about leadership. Real leaders serve their people, even when that requires personal sacrifice. Real leaders think beyond their own lifetime. Her health declined gradually. She faced it with dignity. She had lived 79 years, experienced triumphs and losses, governed a kingdom, survived imprisonment, maintained her identity. Her last days were peaceful. She had failed to restore independence, but succeeded in preserving identity. November 11th, 1917. Liliʻuokalani died at Washington Place at age 79. Her body had surrendered. Her spirit would prove impossible to extinguish. News spread quickly through Honolulu. Hawaiians mourned openly. She wasn't just a former queen. She was the last link to Hawaiian independence. Her death felt like the final closing of a door. The American government declared official mourning. Flags flew at half-mast. Respectful, but politically convenient. But Hawaiians took control of burial arrangements. This would be a Hawaiian funeral for a Hawaiian queen. The funeral procession was enormous. Tens of thousands lined the streets wearing traditional mourning attire. They chanted ancient oli that hadn't been heard publicly in years. They carried maile leis. They were performing Hawaiian identity openly. The service blended Christian and Hawaiian elements. Hymns sung in Hawaiian. Ministers acknowledged her as queen, speaking about her sacrifice and wisdom. They created a narrative of dignified resistance. She was buried in the royal mausoleum alongside other monarchs. Her tomb was simple but dignified. The inscription acknowledged her as Queen Liliʻuokalani. The Liliʻuokalani Trust immediately began operating. Orphaned Hawaiian children continued receiving support. Her music continued being performed. Her legacy lived on institutionally. Historians began assessing her life. American historians portrayed her as tragic but anachronistic. Hawaiian historians portrayed her as a hero who resisted colonization. Her death marked an end, but also a beginning. She became more powerful dead than alive. Decades passed. Hawaii became the 50th American state in 1959. Many assumed Hawaiian culture would fade away. They were wrong. Hawaiian cultural revival movements emerged in the 1970s, and Liliʻuokalani became central to them. Her story became a model for fighting cultural extinction. The Hawaiian Renaissance involved language revival and cultural restoration. Young Hawaiians learned their language, practiced traditional arts, and challenged colonization narratives. They looked to Liliʻuokalani as proof that Hawaiian identity could survive. In 1993, exactly 100 years after the coup, something remarkable happened. The United States Congress formally apologized for overthrowing the Hawaiian kingdom. President Clinton signed it. The resolution acknowledged the coup was illegal and that Native Hawaiians had never surrendered sovereignty. Everything the Liliʻuokalani had claimed was officially validated. The apology was symbolic, but symbols matter. Her music became more popular than ever. Aloha Oe was performed worldwide. The Liliʻuokalani Trust continued serving thousands of Hawaiian children. Hawaiian sovereignty movements invoked her name. Native Hawaiian population began recovering. Hawaiian language was taught in immersion schools. Hawaiian culture was reviving. Washington Place became a museum preserving her legacy. Her final lesson remains clear. Political defeats can be permanent, but cultural defeats need not be. She lost her throne, but preserved what mattered more, the soul of her people. A century after her death, Hawaiian culture thrives. The last queen's greatest victory wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the hearts of her people, who never forgot who they were.